Four of the ghosts of Pluckley are real. Not real in the sense that someone glimpsed a shadow on a foggy night. Real in the sense that they were living, breathing people. People with names, with occupations, with families. People who died in this village and whose private tragedies were quietly transformed into ghost stories over the decades that followed. But here is the question that sits at the heart of tonight's investigation. If those four are real, what about the other 13? Welcome, I'm your host, and this is Myth or Reality Stories, Britain's Bloodlines. Tonight we are in Kent, in the village of Pluckley, population just over 1,000. Hedgerows, orchards, a 14th century church, and, according to legend, at least 17 restless souls who never quite left. Pluckley has held the title of England's most haunted village for more than 70 years. A 1989 mention in the Guinness Book of World Records cemented that reputation globally. Ghost hunters come from across the country. Tours depart after dark. Around Halloween, the local police increase their presence just to manage the crowds. But tonight, we are not going on a ghost tour. We are opening the archive. Where did these stories actually come from? Which of them are rooted in verified history? And which are pure investigation, folklore, dressed up as fact? By the end of this investigation, you will have the answers. This is Pluckley. Let's find out what is really here. Before a single ghost was seen, someone had to write them down. But who and why? Here is something you will not find on most ghost tour leaflets. Before 1950, there is no published record of Pluckley being haunted at all. None. Travel guides from the early 20th century describe the village and its surroundings. They mention nearby curiosities. They discuss the landscape of the Kentish Weald. But Pluckley's ghosts? Entirely absent. No mention in Reverend Oxton's memoir from 1891. No mention in Walter Jevell's Highways and Byways in Kent from 1907. No mention in Unknown Kent from 1921. The village's haunted reputation begins with a single man. His name was Frederick William Thomas Sanders. Born in 1908, died in 1996. A local man, deeply embedded in village life and, crucially, deeply fascinated by the paranormal. As far as current research can establish, Sanders was conducting ghost hunts in the area as early as 1939. He self-published notes from those investigations in 1946, and then, on the 22nd of December 1950, he published an article in the Kentish press under the headline Operation Spooks. That article listed 10 ghosts. It was almost certainly the first time the phrase most haunted village in England had ever been applied to Pluckley. He was not reporting what others had seen. He was collecting and codifying tales gathered from older residents, his family, his neighbours, the village's long memory. He then published them, repeatedly. Ghost hunts followed. His memoir, Pluckley Was My Playground, appeared in 1955, and the story spread into books, into newspapers, into the national consciousness. By the 1960s and 1970s, Pluckley's reputation had taken on a life entirely its own. One man, one article, 22nd of December 1950. That is where England's most haunted village was born. But Sanders did not invent all of these stories from nothing. Some of them, as we will now discover, were rooted in something far more disturbing than folklore. The four who were real. 4 of Pluckley's ghosts have been identified as real historical individuals, but the legends told about them are not always the truth. In 2025, Dr. Simon Wharton of the University of West of England published peer-reviewed research into the origins of Pluckley's ghost stories. Through extensive archival work, scouring death records, parish registers, newspaper archives, and local history documents, he identified the people behind 4 of the village's most famous hauntings. This is extraordinary work, and it tells us something important. The screaming man of the clay pit. The legend says a worker at the local brickworks was smothered by a collapsing wall of drying clay, that his screams echo still from the old pit. According to Dr. Morton's research, there was a real man named Richard Bridgeland who died in an accident at the Pluckley Brick and Tile Works in January 1899. The precise details of his death remain a matter for the archived records, but the connection to the legend appears strong. A real man, a real accident, a real death. The ghost story is the echo of that. The hanging schoolmaster. The legend describes a local teacher who took his own life, his spirit still seen near what was once called Dicky Buss's Lane. The schoolmaster detail is the part that is wrong. Dr. Morton's research identifies the man as Henry Edgar Martin, a papermaker, not a schoolmaster, who died by suicide in August 1919. His death was real, his profession became garbled in the retelling. This is how it works. Real tragedy, real grief, and then, as the decades pass, the details shift. The papermaker becomes a schoolmaster. The horror becomes a ghost story. The Lady of Rose Court. A woman haunts her former home, they say. Heartbroken over a love triangle, she ended her own life by eating poisonous berries. Dr. Morton's research names her as Mary Ann Bennett, who poisoned herself in 1862. Her private anguish, her final act, turned over the course of a century and a half into a romantic legend. And the Watercress Woman. She sits at Pinnock Bridge, a spectral figure quietly smoking a pipe. The legend says she was a gypsy woman, a seller of watercress, who fell asleep drunk on gin and caught herself alight with her own pipe. Dr. Morton's research identifies her as Sarah Sharp, who burned to death in August 1911. In a remarkable personal footnote, Dr. Morton later discovered that Sarah Sharp was her own distant cousin. 4 ghosts, 4 real people, 4 deaths. In 1862, 1899, 1911 and 1919 that became the bedrock of a haunted village's identity. The legends are not entirely invented. 4 of them trace directly to human beings, real deaths and real grief. The question is, what about the rest? The Phantoms of St. Nicholas's Church. At the centre of the village stands a church nearly 900 years old. Inside and in the ground surrounding it, 3 separate apparitions have been reported. But who are they? And is there any evidence they were ever real? St. Nicholas's Church has stood in Pluckley since the 12th century. Its churchyard holds generations of village dead. The Derring family, the most powerful family in the village's history, are particularly associated with this place, and the church has ghosts, several of them. The White Lady. She is Pluckley's most famous apparition. Ethereal, drifting, seen both inside the ancient church and among the tombstones of the churchyard. The legend attached to her is extraordinary, that upon her death, her devoted husband had her buried in 7 lead coffins, sealed inside an oak sarcophagus, hoping to preserve her beauty for eternity. The family name most commonly associated with her is Dering. The Derings were real. They dominated Pluckley for centuries. Their chapel is inside the church. Whether any member of that family was buried in 7 lead coffins, this cannot be verified from the sources currently available. The Red Lady. Often described as another member of the Dering family, the Red Lady is said to haunt the churchyard in a state of perpetual grief, searching for the grave of the stillborn child she never had the chance to bury properly. Her figure is sometimes described as wearing red roses in her hair. Again, no specific named individual has been identified in the sources reviewed to correspond to the Red Lady. The connection to the Dering family is consistent but unverified at the level of a named person. The White Dog. A small, spectral white dog reported near the Red Lady. No historical origin identified. It has been a consistent feature of the churchyard reports for decades. St Nicholas's Church holds 3 reported apparitions. The Dering family connection is historically plausible. The family was real and powerful, but no documentary evidence has been found to verify the specific legends attached to the White Lady or the Red Lady. The church stands at the heart of the village. What surrounds it is stranger still. If you are finding this investigation as compelling as I am, the Myth or Reality shop has everything from ebooks to exclusive merchandise. Link is below. Now, back to Pluckley. Travellers, outlaws and the road. Kent in the 18th century was notorious for highway robbery and smuggling. One of Pluckley's ghosts is said to be a highwayman who died violently at the crossroads. But does the record support it? The roads of the Kentish Weald in the 1700s were dangerous places. Smuggling ran deep throughout the county. Excisemen and outlaws clashed in the dark. Violence was not uncommon. The highwayman. At a crossroads known with a considerable atmosphere as Fright Corner, the legend says a highwayman was cornered by villagers or authorities. He was run through with a sword and pinned against an oak tree. His violent end is said to replay as a ghostly scene over and over at the same spot. One source names the highwayman as a smuggler called Stephen Rich, said to have been killed in a confrontation with excisemen in 1792. The historical context? Smuggling, violence, sudden death on Kent's roads is entirely plausible, but the named individual and the specific story cannot be confirmed. The Phantom Coach and Horses. This is one of England's most enduring ghost archetypes, and Pluckley has its own version. A phantom coach drawn by horses has been reported at multiple locations around the village for well over a century. The sound of hooves on empty roads, the rattle of unseen wheels, sometimes a full visual sighting. In November 1997, one local resident reported hearing the distinct sound of horse hooves on cobblestones, filling her car as she drove home, on a road with no cobblestones. No historical origin has been identified for the coach. It belongs to Pluckley's broader atmosphere rather than a specific documented incident. The Gypsy Woman of Pinnock Bridge. Separate from the Watercress Woman, whose real identity was established as Sarah Sharp, the legend holds that a second gypsy woman drowned in a stream beneath Pinnock Bridge. Her silent figure is said to sit at the water's edge. No historical individual has been identified to correspond to this figure. The Highwayman legend is historically plausible given Kent's violent smuggling past, but the specific named individual cannot be confirmed from primary sources. The coach and the drowned woman remain without documented origin. And then there are the ghosts tied to the village's working life. The spirits of work and loss. Not all of Pluckley's dead were aristocrats or outlaws. Some were ordinary working people, and the village has not forgotten them. The miller. The windmill at Mill Hill was destroyed by lightning in 1939, the same year Frederick Sanders was beginning his ghost hunts. The spirit associated with it is said to be Richard Buss, known locally as Dickie Buss, the mill's last operator, whose dark silhouette is reportedly seen on the hill before a storm rolls in. It is notable that the lane in Pluckley associated with the hanging schoolmaster is called Dickie Buss's Lane. The Buss name is clearly embedded in village history. Whether the miller's ghost corresponds to a documented individual is not confirmed in the sources. The Colonel. In Parkwood, an 18th century military officer is said to have hanged himself. His figure is sometimes seen marching the old paths, sometimes hanging. No named individual has been identified in the sources reviewed. The miller is tied to a real local family name and a real event, the lightning strike of 1939. The Colonel remains without historical foundation in the current research. Inside the village buildings, the story continues. The haunted buildings. Pluckley's ghosts are not confined to woods and lanes. Several of the village's buildings claim their own resident spirits, one of them so disruptive that staff still talk about it. The Monk of Greystones. A hooded monk is said to haunt the grounds of Greystones, a private house in the village. The legend sometimes links him to the Lady of Rose Court, the other participant in the love triangle that ended Mary Ann Bennett's life. His identity is not documented. The Tudor Maid, the Cavalier and the Coachman. The Blacksmith's Arms. The Blacksmith's Arms pub is said to be haunted by a Tudor-era serving girl, sometimes accompanied near the fireplace by a cavalier and an old coachman. No historical origin has been established for any of these figures. The Poltergeist, the Black Horse. This one is different. Rather than a visible apparition, the Black Horse pub has a tradition of unexplained disturbances. Objects moved, items vanished, then reappeared. Patrons and staff have reported these occurrences for years. Whether this constitutes a ghost is a matter of interpretation, but the reports are consistent across multiple independent sources. The Walker, Elvie Farm. Elvie Farm, now operating as a hotel, is said to be haunted by a single figure called the Walker, associated with poltergeist activity. The legend identifies this spirit as Edward Brett, a farmer said to have shot himself at the property in the 18th century, whose final words, "I will do it," are sometimes reportedly heard whispered through the building. The haunting buildings of Pluckley range from unverified legends to consistent multi-witness accounts of unexplained disturbances. None have been confirmed with documentary evidence in the sources currently available. And now we come to the place that perhaps defines Pluckley more than any other. The Screaming Woods. On the edge of the village there is a woodland with a name that has kept people out of it for generations. The question is, what do people actually hear in there? Derring Woods. That is its formal name on the map, but nobody calls it that. They call it the Screaming Woods. The name comes from what people report hearing inside it. Not one ghost, not a single voice, but screaming. Blood-curdling, disembodied screaming, erupting from the heart of the forest, predominantly after dark. The screams are attributed, in the legend, to the collected anguish of all the souls who became lost in the woods over the centuries and died there. Reports of footsteps, shadows that dart between the trees and seem to follow. A sense of being watched. A sense of being followed. Dering Woods is not a small patch of trees. It is a substantial area of ancient woodland on the edge of the village. The kind of space where, in heavy fog, disorientation is generally possible. The screaming reports span generations. They have attracted paranormal investigation teams, television crews, and dedicated researchers. The sheer volume of independent accounts from people with no prior knowledge of legend is, to a rigorous investigator, at least worth noting. Frederick Sanders himself was in those woods. In 1960, the Kentish Express reported on a ghost hunt he led in Dering Woods. The woods was central to his conception of haunted Pluckley from the beginning. The Screaming Woods reports are numerous, long-standing, and span many independent witnesses. No definitive explanation, paranormal or otherwise, has been established. The screaming remains unexplained. Which brings us to the question we have been building towards all evening. We began tonight with a question. 4 of Pluckley's ghosts are demonstrably real. Richard Bridgeland, Henry Edgar Martin, Mary Ann Bennett, and Sarah Sharp. Real people, real deaths. Real grief that this village absorbed and, over time, transformed into something else entirely. One man, Frederick Sanders, is responsible for gathering and publishing these stories, beginning in 1950 and creating the framework that gave Pluckley its global reputation. And the 1989 Guinness Book of World Records? It mentioned the village, but it was not, strictly speaking, an official award. That distinction matters. The record category no longer exists. So, what is Pluckley? It is not a fabrication. 4 of these hauntings anchor directly to documented historical tragedies. The suffering of people left a mark on this place, and that mark became legend. But the full roster of 17? Many cannot be verified. Several were almost certainly embellished in the retelling. Some were possibly invented outright. What Pluckley appears to be, and this is the finding, is something rarer and more interesting than either a genuinely haunted village or a simple hoax. It is a place where real tragedy was absorbed by a community, transformed by the human need to make sense of death and loss, and then amplified by one extraordinary local storyteller into something that took on a life entirely its own. The question now, as always, belongs to you. When 4 of these ghosts trace to verifiable deaths, and the Screaming Woods have been disturbing independent witnesses for generations, do you believe the legend ends there? Or is Pluckley something more? Myth or reality? You decide. Investigate, decide, discover the truth.